You're listening to One Gospel, a unique harmony of the Christian Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is OneStorey, episode 4, entitled Timeline, hosted by Heath and Holly, featuring the artwork of James Tissot. This is another sort of big picture issue and series of lessons that comes up when one puts together a gospel harmony. So, we're going to talk about when did things happen to the extent that we can know, and let's see how close we can get to knowing what's going on. And we'll give you a hypothetical timeline at the end. So, just like our last episode, we're talking about the sources of the writings of the four Gospels. We started with Luke because Luke gave us the most information. Luke gives us a historical anchor for his gospel.
In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, when Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip was tetrarch of Iturea, and the region of Trachonitis, and Licentius was the tetrarch of Abilene, and when Annas and Caiaphas were high priests, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah.
So, the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius Caesar, the second Roman emperor and grandson of Augustus. That's not right. He was the son of Augustus. He was the grandson of Julius. Okay, reigned from August 19th, 14 AD to March 16th, 37 AD. So the 15th year of his reign would be somewhere between August 19th of 28 AD to August 18th of 29 AD. Coins minted during his reign have been found, including coins that co-date the first year of his reign with the 45th year of the Actian era. The Battle of Actium happened in 31 BC. And so, Holly?
Yes.
Do you know anything about the Battle of Actium?
Sadly, I don't.
Yeah. That's when Octavius defeated Brutus.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I just didn't know the name of the
Brutus,
battle.
It was Marcus
Aurelius? No?
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, we're terrible.
I'm falling apart here. But it's when Octavius is Mark Antony. Mark Antony is the one he defeated. Mark Antony,
Cleopatra
guy, right.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Antony and Octavius had a battle over who was going to consolidate power. Or maybe Mark Antony was just trying to save the Republic. Who knows?
In Actium. Got it.
Yeah. Anyway, archaeological and classical evidence confirm the historicity of, meaning, like our friend here, Luke, gave us a series of things. He said, hey, all these people were around at the time of John the Baptist. So we have direct evidence that Pontius Pilate was prefect of Judea from 26 to 36. Herod Antipas, tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, was he reigned from 4 BC to 39 AD. Now, a lot of these things are, circa, so about 4 BC to about 39 AD. There's uncertainty in these timings, but there's not uncertainty in the people existing and the fact that they existed at the time that Luke is saying that they did. Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, from about 4 BC to 34 AD. Licentius, tetrarch of Abilene, we don't know when he reigned, we just know he existed. Annas, the high priest, was high priest from 6 to 15 AD. Caiaphas was high priest from 18 to 36 AD. But because Caiaphas was the son-in-law of Annas, Annas would have still had a lot of political power. So there is reason to trust Luke's historical approach. And that is, again, our anchor. So how much total time passed in his gospel?
A certain one had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, And he came seeking fruit on it, but found none. He said to the keeper of his vineyard, Look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and found none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground? And he said to him, Lord, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears no fruit, if it bears fruit, fine. But if not, after that, you will cut it down.
Okay, so this took place in Jesus' final journey to Jerusalem, so it's probably months before he died. And he says this parable, kind of indicating that there was basically Israel had 4 years to get the message. Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
Like, I'm not reading into that. That's
No.
not some crazy interpretation. Okay, so when was the call for bearing fruit? When did that begin? Well, I would say it began with John the Baptist.
O generation of vipers, who has warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Therefore bear fruit worthy of repentance. Do not begin to think within yourselves, saying, We have Abraham as our father. For I say to you that God is able to raise up children of Abraham out of these stones. Even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which does not bear good fruit is to be cut down and cast into the fire.
Okay, so both Luke and Matthew record John the Baptist specifically saying, bear fruit or the tree's going to get cut down, right? So there was a curse from unfruitfulness that came the week of Jesus' death.
In the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry. And when he saw a fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it but leaves. He said to it, Let no fruit grow from you forever. Immediately the fig tree withered away.
So if we took the 4-year hypothesis from that parable, from the beginning point, 29 AD, well, it's 28/29 AD, but if it began exactly in the spring as the starting point because Jesus died in the spring, then it would be the spring of 29 AD. So this would estimate that Jesus' death would be in the 19th year of Tiberius during Passover, 33 AD. This parable does not have to be interpreted historically. I am choosing to because it makes sense. So you can already say this is garbage, but that's all right. There's other things that are coming, and they're not all like reliant on parables. Okay. John provides more information on timing as well.
Then the Jews said, It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?
So based on the verb tense, the Passover, which was this, that's when this was happening. John 2:13 places that quote in the Passover. So based on the verb tense, it was at least 46 years after the temple was rebuilt. So it didn't have to be exactly 46 years, but it was at least 46 years. Joseph identifies Herod's 18th year as when the temple was rebuilt, which would be about 19 to 20 BC, but Herod the Great's reign is based on Josephus' account and has multiple levels of uncertainty. The uncertainties are when did it begin and when did it end? If one were to add 46 years to 19 or 20 BC, that would bring us to 27 to 28 AD. So this is not exactly lining up with 29, but it's very close. So as far as number of Passovers, what do we have here? Jesus feeds the 5,000 on near another Passover. Okay, so the point this is making is this first quote was at a Passover. John identifies a second Passover as being at the feeding of the 5,000 in John 6, and Jesus' death was on another Passover, John 13. Therefore, at least according to John, Jesus' public ministry was more than 24 months based on the number of Passovers, because it was 3. So his public ministry had to be, that puts a minimum at it. We'll put it that way. But John didn't name every feast. He heals an invalid at the pool of Bethesda during an unnamed Jewish feast. I think my guess for that was that it was the Feast of Purim. Jesus attends the Feast of Tabernacles in John 7:2. He attends the Feast of Dedication in John 10:22. If it wasn't for John, we wouldn't know about Jesus attending any feast in Jerusalem other than his final Passover. But it seems highly unlikely that John described every feast Jesus attended. Wouldn't you agree on that?
Yes.
Yes. So it's not like just because John describes 3 Passovers doesn't mean that there couldn't be 4, 5, 6, 7, it could be way more than that. We just know that the minimum is 2+ years, and we've already hypothesized based on Luke that it was a 4-year period of time from John the Baptist until Jesus' death. Okay, so Luke seems to be naming another feast. So I am going to give you a reason why it is possible that there is actually in Jesus' ministry a 4th Passover, or at least another. It doesn't have to be Passover, but another feast in the earlier part of the year. Okay, go ahead, Holly.
Jesus went on the second of the first Sabbath through the grain fields. His disciples were hungry and began to make away, plucking the heads of grain and eating them, rubbing them in their hands.
Second of the first is called a double Sabbath by John Chrysostom in homilies on Matthew.
At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungered and began to pluck the ears of the corn and to eat. But Luke saith on a double Sabbath. Now what is a double Sabbath? When the cessation from toil is twofold, both that of the regular Sabbath and that of another feast coming up. For they call every cessation from toil a Sabbath.
Okay, so we have a word from Luke that says it was a double Sabbath when they were picking grain. The Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Weeks are Sabbaths that occur when grain would be ripe. Barley for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, wheat for the Feast of Weeks. It's also possible that this double Sabbath concept is just an ordinary Sabbath that follows the day after a feast, but it would still have to be at the same time of the year. Mm-hmm. But one of these 2 feasts seems to be the context either way. Only Sabbath is found in most ancient Luke manuscripts. The double Sabbath is found in a minority of early manuscripts, but it's part of the majority text. But it doesn't contradict. It doesn't contradict to have just ordinary Sabbath, but that in a way simplified the story, but the word double Sabbath actually helps with placing this in a more specific time frame. So candidates for double Sabbaths have been proposed for AD 27, 30, and 33, and AD 29, 30, and 33, depending whether it's the Feast of Weeks or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, they did have double Sabbaths around the time period 29 or 30 AD, which would fit what we're already talking about. So Luke 6:1, where that double Sabbath was, likely happened on a year different than the Passovers that John describes as well. Like, it wouldn't have been the same one. And that's because after the first Passover in John 2, there's in John 4 a line where Jesus indicates that it's winter?
Do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest?
Right. So, I mean, you're not going to say that. You're going to say that, you're not going to say that like, well, I guess it depends on the harvest, right? But, I mean, assuming we're talking about like one of the primary harvests, like the wheat harvest, which comes in like June, or if it's the barley harvest, which comes in the spring, that would have either of those, if that's, the harvest 4 months away, that would be winter time, right? So if it's the winter time in John 4, but it's the springtime in John 2, that means it had to have been the next year.
Yeah.
Okay. Holly, you're with me, right?
I'm on it.
Okay. And the Passover of John 6, which is the one after John 2, it overlaps because of the feeding of the 5,000 with Luke 9. Mm-hmm. So that means Luke 6 was before that. Mm-hmm. So that means this accounts for another feast, even if it's not Passover and it's Feast of Weeks, it still accounts for a time period that's between John 4, which was the winter, and then John 6, which is the following Passover, because that's the spring of the next year.
Yes.
Okay, so there we go. So Jesus' public ministry was very likely to be more than 36 months, because we actually have 4 identified Passovers now. Now, history is not as clear as is often assumed. So when did Tiberius's reign begin? Well, I mean, he co-led with Augustus for up to a few years prior to Augustus's death. So that's based on Roman history. So the proposed Luke timeline could be moved back 2 years instead of 29 to 33 AD to 27 to 31 AD, and that potentially fits better with John's dating. So that is a choice. Mm-hmm. And although that would not have coincided with Roman convention, they likely marked the beginning of his reign with Augustus's death, even though he didn't Yeah, so like they wouldn't have counted the beginning of his reign when he co-reigned with Augustus. The convention is they would have began his reign at the time that Augustus died. But even their own history says, well, he didn't even accept the title of emperor for some time after Augustus died. So you can take the Roman convention with a grain of salt. When does someone really begin their reign? Is it when they actually begin executing power, or is it when they accept the title? Well, it depends, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but that quote from Life of Tiberius says that he did not hesitate to assume to exercise the imperial authority because he surrounded himself with a guard of soldiers. So he had the actual power and the outward sign of sovereignty. Yet he refused the title for a long time with barefaced hypocrisy, now upbraiding his friends who urged him to accept it, saying that they did not realize what a monster they didn't realize what a monster the empire was, and now by evasive answers and calculating hesitancy, keeping the senators in suspense when they implored him to yield and fell at his feet. Yeah. History's, it's murky. Mm-hmm. So early Christian writers were close, but not totally in agreement. So, I had said, what did I say? It was 33 AD is what year? I shouldn't be doing this. This is bad. Okay, I give up. I'm going forward. But other Christian writers tried to date his death. And so they weren't exactly, they didn't all choose the same year. So Hippolytus said Jesus suffered in his 33rd year on the 8th day before the calends of April on a Friday, the 18th year of Tiberius Caesar, in the consulship of Rufus and Ruffelian. So they said 18th year of Tiberius. Gospel of Nicodemus said 19th year of Tiberius. And they gave, what they say, 17th year of the government of Herod, the son of Herod, king of Galilee, and on the 8th of the calends of April, which is the 23rd day of the month of March in the Olympiad, when Joseph and Caiaphas were ruler of the Jews. That is, so you can see one said 18th year of Tiberius, one said 19th. And then there's Daniel's 70 weeks, which no one would say is a historical document. It was a prophecy written hundreds of years before Jesus, but it itself had a prediction of when, if you use a code, it gives a prediction of when Messiah would be cut off. So why don't you just read that, Holly?
70 weeks are determined upon the people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression and make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah of the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself.
Okay, so Daniel had this vision in like 444 BC. Even people who don't believe that Daniel wrote it back then, the manuscripts go back way before Jesus. So there's no question that this prophecy pre-existed him. But basically, he's saying there's 70 weeks from the point from the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, and that after 69 weeks, the Messiah would be cut off. So when will the Messiah be cut off? Well, and in Greek it said destroyed. So in the Greek translation of Daniel and the Septuagint, there's no ambiguity. They're talking about him being killed. 69 sevens after the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. We know when that happened. It was the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. We also know that 7 calendar years can be called a week. We know that from Genesis. We know that in the Bible code, as it were, that a month is 30 days, and that 360 days is equivalent to like a year, instead of the actual, the solar year that we have. But keep in mind, Daniel didn't say years. He just said sevens. So they're like really 7 periods of time. So what is a period of time? A period of time is based on these sort of idealized periods of time that were already described previously in the Torah and also later in the Revelation. So 69 sevens of these idealized years, 360-day years, you can do the math for that. And that comes out to 476 solar years and 21 days. And we have an ancient historian, Julius Africanus. He was Christian, but he basically said when this happened, he said it was in the 83rd Olympiad. And that actually, it's funny, you know, like that matches what accepted history is. Like if you map that, I mean, if you go to Wikipedia and see, you know, when did Artaxerxes reign, it matches up. So even though I'm quoting a Christian, that this is accepted history actually when this happened. So if the first Olympiad was the summer of 776 BC, the fourth year, the 83rd Olympiad, would be spring of 444 BC. And 476 years and 21 days after that brings us to the spring of 33 AD. That's kind of a wacky coincidence, isn't it, Holly?
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
Yeah. That's when Messiah was cut off, according to an ancient tradition. So we have more than one thing pointing us. And I will say that Africanus had a totally different calculation, which I don't agree with. But he said that he actually was also looking at when the 70th week would end, and he was using 354-day years, which would be uncorrected lunar years. You know, if you just used the moon and had 12 months of lunar months. So that would, if you took 70 weeks or 490 uncorrected lunar years, that would take you to the late winter of 31 AD. So it is actually possible, because 70 AD, they said after 70 weeks is when the Messiah would be anointed, even though he was cut off after 69 weeks. So it is possible that when Jesus was anointed as the most holy was actually while he was still alive, like is potentially some kind of anointing event, and that he's cut off at the 69th week at the same time, which is actually this like wild mathematical double fulfillment, which is even more amazing to sort of comprehend, although I don't have an exact event and date of an event that I can kind of hang my hat on. So I just find this very interesting, and it's like to the point that I think it's probably true. I just can't explain it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we're going to get to, well, when did Jesus die? Because you need to know a lunar calendar to go the other direction. Like if you want to use the movement of the moon and, like, because it's highly predictable in Jerusalem, when is the moon going to become visible? And then that's what's used to make a lunar calendar. So if we could correlate what we know from astronomy to the calendar at that time, which was the Julian calendar, came from Julius Caesar, then we can narrow down what years Jesus died. So basically, so far, just to do the quick interim summary so we don't get lost, we're trying to guess, what can we, the only historical anchor we have from Luke is 29 AD, and we already have hypothesized that he said 33 AD would be when he died. But besides looking at Luke, we looked at what John said. We looked at the total number of Passovers to make sure that the total number of years made sense. And we also looked at what other Christian authors said. So other Christian authors placed it around 33, 34 AD. Now, and then we looked at Daniel's prophecy and said, well, that looks like it's 33 AD. Well, now we're going to look at astronomy and see what that tells us is possible. Do you want to guess what one of the candidates might be, Holly?
I don't know.
I'm going to guess one of them's 33 AD. What do you think?
Oh, years, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay, here we go. So the most common candidates, because the working assumption here is that Jesus died on a Friday. And at least for the people that were doing this. And they're saying that when was a Passover on a Friday? And based on when was the moon visible, and correlate that to the Julian calendar. And so your biggest candidates are 30 and 33 AD. There's also non-Friday candidates. There's a Thursday out there, which is 34 AD. And then you got some Wednesdays, because we're going to talk about that. What day did Jesus die? That's kind of exciting too. But remember, this isn't exactly saying when did he die. This is saying when was there a Passover, according to the lunar calendar, which is predictable by the moon's movement.
Yeah.
Okay. Because then you got to say, did Jesus actually die on the Passover? Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke describe Jesus celebrating the Passover with his disciples the evening before his death. So that would mean if he died the next day, it would still be the Passover, because the Hebrew definition of a day starts in the evening and goes to the next evening, which is, if you go back to the creation story in Genesis, they say the evening and the morning, the first day, right?
Yep.
However, John says that the same meal, the Last Supper, is the day before the Passover. And they say the same thing about Jesus' trial, crucifixion, and burial. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke describe the Passover as the first day of unleavened bread. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all agree that he died on a preparation day. Now, I will say that the Feast of Unleavened Bread, if you look at the Torah, that begins after Passover. So you have Passover on the 14th of Nisan, and then or Habib, whichever month name you want to use, Babylonian or Hebrew. And then you have 7 days of unleavened bread afterwards. But because in the actual Passover meal, because they eat unleavened bread on that meal, it was commonly said in that time they lumped Passover into unleavened bread. I know, it's getting even more ambiguous, isn't it, Holly?
It is.
Okay. Mark, Luke, and John also call it a day prior to the Sabbath. So everybody agrees that it was a preparation day. And preparation day generally means a day before a Sabbath anyway, so that lines up really well. But the real question is, was it the Passover or the day before the Passover? So, again, God's original calendar, the real calendar, he gives a calendar for both Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So in the 10th day of Abib, every man was to take a lamb. On the 14th day of Abib, the Passover was killed. The lamb was roasted, and then they ate the meal. So that was on the evening of the 14th of Abib. And then the following full day, beginning in that evening, the 15th to 21st, was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, with the first and last days Sabbaths. So you have the ordinary Sabbath, which is every 7 days, but then you also have these special Sabbaths, which are the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The first and last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Let's put it that way. Okay, so we're back to, did Jesus die on the Passover? So there are multiple possibilities here. They have different first days of the month, and the 14th day of Abib was 1 day later than the Jewish leadership. So that's been my working theory. I think that Jesus celebrated the Passover a day earlier than the Jews did, because there was some ambiguity about when you actually observe the moon and when is the first day of your month. And you can actually have honest people coming up with different answers. So the Jewish leadership celebrated, the other possibility is just that the Jewish leadership celebrated the Passover meal on the first day of unleavened bread, a Sabbath, instead of the 14th of Abib, but I don't think that would be accurate. Then it's also possible that Jesus had a Passover meal with his disciples a full day early so he could be sacrificed in the evening when the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed. Because as I said, the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed for the 14th day meal, for that Passover meal. So so you could say that, well, actually he celebrated the Passover a full day earlier just so that timing of his death would line up. Anyway, you can take your pick on that, but I think they just celebrated the Passover on different days. Okay. The Day of Atonement didn't fall on the same day in all Jewish calendars. So now I'm starting to give you reasons why you can believe that they actually celebrated the Passover on different days. We have in the Dead Sea Scroll community, we have this scroll where they describe that they were attacked by the Jews of Jerusalem on the Day of Atonement. Well, I mean, what are the odds that a highly religious Jerusalem Jewish community would attack somebody on their holy day? It's more likely that they were attacking them on a day that they celebrated as a holy day, but that they didn't. So that was like a tactical advantage. Holly shakes her head yes there. Okay. The Sanhedrin declared when the Passover was to be based on multiple witnesses testifying to seeing the new moon. So this is in the Talmud. And it was understood, this is again in the Talmud, it was understood that on unclear days, some may see the new moon and not report it. So the first day of the month might be different between two honest parties. So Jesus and his disciples could have celebrated the Passover meal one day earlier than the establishment based on different observations. This made it possible for him to both celebrate the Passover and be sacrificed as a Passover lamb right before the Passover was celebrated by his people, in large, meaning the establishment. Okay. So that at least, when they say, did Jesus celebrate the Passover or did he die on the Passover? I think the answer is yes. You could say he did both. Now, when did he rise? There's a lot of different wording used. They use in 3 days, by 3 days, on the third day, and after 3 days, and after 3 days and 3 nights. That's a lot of different wording. And in English, they don't all mean the same, do they, Holly?
Nope.
Okay. In English, after 3 days would imply after 3 24-hour periods, meaning after 72 hours have finished, and the third day would imply during the third 24-hour period, meaning between 48 to 72 hours afterwards. Jesus died on the cross just after the 9th hour while the sun was up on preparation day. He was buried in the evening. So by a Jewish calendar, the day begins in the evening. We already said that. Therefore, his death, when his soul entered Sheol, could be described as happening the day before his burial. Right?
Yep.
Because they said he was buried in the evening,
yes,
meaning the new day had just started.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people would say, no, it was right before sundown, so it wasn't really the next day yet. There's ambiguity there, right? But still, one could say that he didn't die and get buried on exactly the same day. And you could make that argument.
Yes.
Here we go. 3 days and 3 nights could have passed before he returned to earth as a risen being, while his body could have resurrected on the third day from the time of his burial. Yeah, because he died a day earlier. Okay, and there was one place where these phrases are actually put together in the same parallel statement. So this is actually how I chose to do it. So this is from Matthew 16, Mark 8, and Luke 9:22.
From that time, Jesus began to teach his disciples, saying that the Son of Man was to go to Jerusalem, suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the Torah teachers, be killed, and to rise 3 days after death, the third day after burial.
So that's how I chose to, it's getting back to this whole gospel harmony thing, right? That's how I chose to, condense to rise after 3 days and to rise the third day. On what day was the tomb found empty? I think this one's actually easier. When he had arisen early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary the Magdalene. Holly's stepping on my foot. She wants to read this. Go ahead, Holly.
When the Sabbath was past, Mary the Magdalene, the other Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices, so that they may come and anoint him, very early in the morning at dawn, when it was still dark, on the first day of the week. They with certain others came to see the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared. Today is the third day since these things happened, the events of his condemnation and crucifixion.
Okay, so on the day it was found empty, we see it was the first day of the week, the Sabbath was over, and it's the third day since the condemnation and crucifixion happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all those things.
Yes.
All right. So now we're going to pull all of these things together, Holly. Okay, one theory is he died on a Friday. In this scenario, the Passover of the Jewish leadership began Friday evening when the ordinary Sabbath began, and he arose at dawn on Sunday. This covers a small part of 2 days and 1 full day, and 2 complete nights, but not 3, between his death and resurrection. Sunday would not have been the third day since his death. So the people have said it's been 3 days since this. No, they would not have said that. He died on a Thursday. In this scenario, the Passover of the Jewish leadership began Thursday evening and lasted until Friday evening. This would have been a Sabbath for Jesus' followers based on it being the first day of unleavened bread that follows the Passover, but the Jewish leadership may have also treated their Passover as a Sabbath as well. The regular Sabbath lasted from Friday evening until Saturday evening. Death to resurrection would have covered part of 3 days and 3 full nights. He could have risen before dawn. No part of Sunday during the day is needed, and Sunday would have been the third day since his death. This seems the most plausible.
Yes.
He died on a Wednesday. In this scenario, the Passover of the Jewish leadership began Wednesday evening. It was treated like a Sabbath. The first day of unleavened bread began on Thursday evening and was a high Sabbath. The ordinary Sabbath began Friday evening. He would have risen 72 hours, 3 full days and nights after his burial at sundown on Saturday. Sunday would not have been the third day since his death. Because, if you die on a Wednesday and it's a Sunday, they wouldn't have said it's been 3 days since these things have happened. Because if you're on a Sunday and you said it's been 1 day since this has happened, that'd be Saturday. And if it was on a Friday, you'd say it's been 2 days since this happened. And if it's on a Thursday, you would have said it's been 3 days since this happened.
4 days if it was that scenario.
Yes.
Got it.
So this goes back to at least using the wording of the Gospels in the various ways that they describe it the Thursday scenario holds up the best. And then you go back to those calendar things and you're like, well, does that mean that then it's Passover on a Thursday, 34 AD? That's possible. But it's also possible that the Passover was really the Friday, 33 AD, and that Jesus celebrated with his disciples before the Passover so he could die.
Yeah.
Right before the Passover started, according to that timeline.
Yes.
Which seems like the most likely, because a lot of things point to 33 AD.
Amen.
Okay. So we've looked at that. Now we're going to look at one more thing, his birth.
It came to pass in the days of Herod the king that a decree from Caesar Augustus went out, that all of the world should be registered. This census first came to pass when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And Jesus was about 30 years of age.
Okay, so at his baptism, he was about 30. So, if Jesus was born 30 years prior to Luke's historical anchor of 29 AD, that would bring us to 2 BC. But we could plausibly say it's plus or minus 5 years because, you could say you're about 30 if you're 26 to 34. You okay with that, Holly?
I think if somebody thought I was about 30 at 26, I would have felt a bit old.
Yeah.
But it's plausible.
Yeah. Okay, so Tertullian, he placed Jesus' birth around 1 BC or 1 AD, somewhere in there, at the 41st year of Augustus's reign and 28 years after Cleopatra's death. So that's close. 1 BC, 2 BC, that's close. But most historians say Luke and Matthew are incompatible. Boo. Okay, Herod the Great ruled Judea under the authority of Rome approximately 40 BC until approximately 4 BC. That's, you look up Wikipedia, that's what you're going to find. And the tax census of Quirinius is placed by Josephus at the end of the reign of Archelaus, Herod the Great's son, in 6 AD. Meaning that the tax census of Quirinius did not overlap with the reign of Herod the Great. And they would say, this is impossible, and history points all this out to be wrong. Now, of course, I'm just going to go back a second here. All of our information comes from one guy, Josephus. So actually we're not really saying that history is contradicting the Bible. What we're really saying is that Josephus is contradicting the Bible. And, he's a smart guy. But, there's some other things here. Josephus wrote his Antiquities in 93 AD. This is used to date the death of Herod the Great. 93 AD. Let's see, so that'd be like 100 years after Herod died. That's the one thing we have to date his death. All right, here we go. So Antiquities 18.106 implies that he died 3 to 4 BC, but some manuscripts give an alternate number implying he died in 1 to 2 BC. Interesting. Antiquities 15.121 implies his reign began 37 BC, so it could have ended either 3 BC or 1 AD, depending on how long his reign is reckoned. And that's because you can reckon his reign of when the Romans gave him authority, or you can reckon his reign from when he actually took power. And that's because history is complicated.
It's murky.
It's murky.
I like that word.
So Herod the Great's end of reign is not precisely dated, but does fit within Luke's estimate of being about when Jesus was 30. So, if we go back to that 2 BC thing. Okay. Again, Josephus wrote this in 93 AD. And this is the only thing we have used to date the tax census of Quirinius.
100 years later.
Well, yeah, like 90 years later. Anyway, he says he places it at 7 AD, the 37th year of Augustus's victory in Actium. Okay, 7 AD. He describes it as immediately after Archelaus. He also he also describes a tax revolt against, that tax, which is actually mentioned in Acts. So Luke, apparently did know about this tax revolt. He mentions it in Acts 5:37. And I will say the historicity of Quirinius' governorship in Syria is supported by a coin dated to 5-6 AD. So we can say that he was there at 7 AD. So we can say that, legitimately, that he may have done a tax at the time that people are saying here. But is it possible, Holly, that there could have been a second earlier census that he was also a part of?
Indeed.
I guess we'll find out. Here we go. So another census is described by Tertullian, and he said it's under Saturninus, who is believed to be the imperial legate of Syria from 9 to 6 BC. Just so, I don't begin to know all this stuff, but there's being like a governor, and then there's being the imperial legate. They had like basically two leaders. One person was like the administrative civilian leader, they ran the government. The other person was like the head of the army for that area. So they always had like two leaders at the same time. So I think imperial legate is that. Anyway, censi, that's my plural for census, were regularly done in Egypt in the 1st century AD, and they required those subjugated to return to their ancestral homes. Kind of like what Joseph said he was doing. The imperial legate of Syria from 4 to 1 BC is unknown because in between Saturninus and Caius Caesar, who was the son of Augustus before he died in Armenia. Anyway, Caius took on the role in 1 AD. So we have this hole in history, Holly, a hole in history. It would be nice for us to know who was in charge of Syria, wouldn't it? So where was Quirinius at this time? Well, we don't actually know exactly where he was in the empire, but we do know in 1 AD he joined Caius to help in Armenia, meaning he was probably in the eastern part of the empire. He was, after that, one of 2 officials holding a joint office in Asia Minor, and he did that before becoming governor of Syria. So we know he's on the Eastern Empire continually from 1 AD on. Is it possible he was in the Eastern Empire before 1 AD? Is it possible, Holly?
Yes.
It's possible. Okay, so there's a monument which is only partially readable. Don't you love stuff like this?
Yeah.
It describes a 2-time proconsul of Syria under Augustus. So there's one person under Augustus who was the head of Syria twice. But we don't know who it is because it's only partially readable.
Could it be Quirinius?
Quirinius? An earlier census under Quirinius in the time of Herod the Great is actually plausible. We can't say we know it happened. We can only say that's plausible. And we can say that Luke says it happened. So it's not like you're making it up because you have a historical document that was written around 60 AD, written before Antiquities by 30 years. where all of his other historical stuff lines up, and he's reporting. He's just a reporter, and he's reporting that it happened. So, we have a historical document that was like 60 years later reporting that it happened. So, and all we can say from the rest of the historical record that we have is that it's plausible.
I stand with Luke.
You stand with Luke. All right, good. So in summary, John the Baptist began his inspired message in the 15th year of Tiberius's reign. Jesus' ministry and death are not otherwise dated, but his death was probably about 4 years from the starting point, which would be the 19th year of Tiberius's reign. Jesus' ministry was very likely more than 36 months in length. The tomb was found empty on a Sunday, and Jesus likely died on a Thursday, with 33 and 34 AD the most plausible candidates, but I like 33. His birth was near the end of Herod the Great's reign during a census decreed by Augustus and administered by Quirinius, governor of Syria. The most plausible candidates are 2 to 4 BC. So this is the timeline that I have as part of my harmony. Dun, dun, dun. We start with the anchor, and we put that in bold, right? So John's messianic prophecies begin in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. And then right before his death, he implies that God's message has not been received for 3 years, and only one more year will be given. His death is in Passover, 33 AD. His resurrection would be the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 33 AD. The baptism in the Holy Spirit of the Jerusalem believers happens in the Feast of Weeks, also called Pentecost, 33 AD. Jesus' first cleansing of the temple during Passover, a bit more than 46 years after the temple construction began. Jesus teaches and heals on a double Sabbath when the standing grain was ripe to eat, 31 AD, in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Jesus feeds the 5,000 soon after John is executed near the Passover, and then declares himself the bread of life. This was 32 AD, so this was 1 year prior to his death. Jesus was in Sychar 4 months before the harvest, around the time John is arrested, which is in January of 31 AD, based on it being 4 months before the harvest. Jesus heals an invalid at the pool of Bethesda during a Jewish feast, which we believe is Purim, 32 AD. Jesus attends the Feast of Tabernacles in 32 AD. He attends the Feast of the Dedication, also called Hanukkah, in 32 AD. Jesus is born during the census of Augustus, administered by Cyrenius/Quirinius. Cyrenius is his Greek name, Quirinius is his Latin name, so he would have really been known by Quirinius. While Herod was king of Judea, Feast of Tabernacles, 2 BC. You might say, why are you saying Feast of Tabernacles? Well, they said about Jesus that he dwelt among us, which means he tabernacled among us, based on the time that we know that the shepherds were sleeping outside. So that would fit with a fall date. So I'm going to just wildly put in my hypothetical timeline that he was actually born in the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a feast where we symbolically camp with God. What do you think about that, Holly?
Wild.
It's wild. John the Baptist, he was born 6 months before Jesus. 6 months before Feast of Tabernacles brings you to Passover. So we'll just say that's Passover, 2 BC. All right. Thanks for listening. I know that's a lot. For any of you who listen to this whole thing, God bless you. But I think, again, when we, go back to the end of the last one, if you trust the sources, you'll trust the source. And if you trust the source, you'll trust the sources. There's a lot of reason to believe that these are historically accurate as far as when the things happened, where they happened. And it doesn't matter that I don't have it exactly figured out, but it's not fair to the Gospels themselves to just say, oh, well, we see somewhere that, our quote unquote accepted history says that it's impossible. And I just don't think that's true. What do you think, Holly?
I agree.
All right. With that, thank you very much.